Hello and welcome to the Daily Atheist Morning Show. It is Friday the 13th of March. Friday the 13th. Are you scared? Are you scared? It's one of those things. I have got, for me, and welcome, I hope you guys are ready for the weekend. I have got a panel of folk who have come on this morning. We've got Damien Marie Adhope. He is our guest host for Fridays and Mondays. Good morning, Damien. If y'all are watching the chat, I almost forgot to send Damien a link. So that's how my Friday's going. And then we also have another guest host this morning, and that's Steven Tiger. We've met Steven Tiger a couple times. He's got the book Doctrine Impossible. He was with us yesterday with his friend. I can do this. Bernard Lambarel.
Correct.
Look at that. Look at me. I did it all by myself, alone and scared. And then we've also got Max Humana. He's another author, and he's going to be our special guest this morning. So good morning, guys. Hello,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Hello, everyone.
Damien, howdy. Stephen, howdy. Max, howdy. Max, if you don't mind, since you're the new guy here and we've never had you on before, if you'll give us a brief, rundown of who you are and what's going on.
Sounds great. Thank you. No, I very much appreciate you guys having me on the show. This is fantastic. Wonderful opportunity and really great to talk with folks of the same persuasion. So just a little bit about me. I am a retired military officer. Had to spend 23 years kind of buttoned down doing the military thing. Wow. Salute the flag and do what you do. Yeah. And as I got through about the Bush years, I decided that I was going to have to do something different. So while I still did the Army thing on Army duty, I decided to start writing, thinking, and that was the genesis of what I got to be today, which is a self-published author, atheist, strong progressive, humanist, all those type things. That's kind of where the name Max Humana came from. So the gist of the effort is to spread secular humanism throughout the world, a progressivism, a secular humanism, and I wanted to do it in a couple of different ways, scientifically and also emotionally, because as you all very well know, most people don't react very well to science. They don't react very well to facts, but they do react very well to emotion. So I wanted to try to leave my stamp on the world in a way that was going to be enduring in terms of a book. And it was also going to be something that anybody could pick up in terms of a person who's just questioning faith, or who'd never heard of religion or heard of atheism, or a person who's either a strong atheist or a strong religious believer. And by the time they got to the end of the book, they would be faced with reams of not just factual data, but visceral knives to the gut about how bad religion really is wherever it's gone.
Gotcha. Awesome. Wonderful. We're glad to have you amongst us. Actually.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I just want to take a quick moment to say hi to everybody in the chat. We got Sandy the Sane, and Kristen is here. Best name ever. She's awesome. Michael Englehart, my buddy Mike. He's my buddy. Mikey, we need to hang out this weekend, Mike, sometime. I'll get with you, if possible. Easeism Works is here. And then good morning, Ease. How you doing? Damien Adhope, wondering where his link is. Dave, did I miss anybody? Critical Cripple is here. I think I got everybody for now. Other folks will show up. Nerdy Rodent is here. El Nerdento de Rodento is here. You guys didn't know I spoke Spanish. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Thank you again, Damien and Stephen, for co-hosting with me today. So Max, if you would like to now tell us a little bit specifically more about your book. I'm going to actually, can I pop your covers up real quick?
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Okay? Yeah, because, wrong button. I appreciate that Tiger had you get these things. Steve had you get these things, together for me. So at least I could do is put them up. So, while I do this, go ahead and tell us about your book, brother.
Okay, will do. Thank you very much. So I write in two different lanes, and they're very, very closely related. That is the first one you're just showing right there is the politics lane. And as we all know, politics and religion are irrevocably intertwined. So as a progressive and a scientist, I have written, the Conservistan right there is a great example of, kind of what it's, if you've read Jonathan Swift, he's very satirical, and his modest proposal, not to go deep in history, but his modest proposal was about how folks in that time ought to deal with overpopulation and some other problems. My book, Conservistan, is if we just say, fine, we're going to cut the United States into two halves and let those of us with intellect and with science and actually compassion and facing reality live in the north in blue land, and send all the conservatives south of the Mason-Dixon line there to red land, and just how things would go. So it's kind of a Swift for today's world.
Gotcha. Real quick, I just want to mention as somebody who lives in New Mexico.
Yes.
New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona would probably. I don't know about Arizona. Yeah. How do you cut that out? I get you. I see how you did that. Yeah.
It was really hard. I sort of went with sort of the during the revolutionary times, kind of who was in the Confederacy and who was out. I was born and raised in New Orleans, and actually literally was in New Mexico yesterday at White Sands Missile Range. So,
oh, really? Yeah.
I'm very familiar with sort of the South and living in the North as well.
Right. Yeah, I'm from Texas and live in New Mexico, and there's a difference.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
We're a lot bluer now. My understanding is Arizona is pretty red, But what we could do is we just ship them over to Texas. Now, Texas I don't think was officially part of the South during the Civil War. I don't think they were officially part of the Southern Union. I could be wrong. It's been a day or three, but I don't think they were. I think they leaned that way and they were sympathetic to them, but it was still more range country. Anyway, you've got quite a few books. Some of these are actually just snippets or chapters of your big book. Let me see if I can find it here.
Yes, some of them are. I've got 7 books that are actually kind of, if you look at the music industry, what they do is they'll put an album out, and Thank God for Eve right there is my magnum opus. So that is a very, very large book. As it turns out, providence, divine or otherwise, as I was finishing the formatting of the paper book, led me to a total of 666 printed pages. I did not plan that. That's just kind of how it happened. Very fortuitous hit of providence there.
Yes.
So that is the master. And just as the music industry that have albums and you also have singles off of that, for a lot of people, 666 pages is a bit much. So I took some of the most relevant, pertinent, and in fact, pungent chapters out, and I turned those into chapter books, if you will. So there's about 7 of those that are separate out, and that's one of them.
This is one of them here?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. As I go up, just point out which one. This is one as well, right?
That's a chapter book, and that one is, in fact, the one that Andrew Seidel out of the Freedom from Religion Foundation just wrote one kind of like that. That chapter actually has a lot of the stuff that Andrew later put in his book.
Really?
Very, very similar stuff, but we kind of see things from a little bit different, same angle, but we express it a little differently.
Gotcha.
The next one, Why is any moral person still a Catholic? That's one of the more pungent, potent ones. That's a chapter book.
Okay. Oh, chapter 21 here. I see it now. Yeah.
And that's a chapter book.
So I have a question about the Catholics. Do you believe that someone can be a Catholic and not support the Catholic Church?
So that's kind of being a Christian and not supporting Christianity. I mean, philosophically, mentally, morally, I'm not sure if that's possible.
But what I mean is, there's a whole history of Catholic stuff that doesn't have to do. In other words, I could believe that the Catholic teachings and because they have a little bit different book than the Protestants have. I mean, I don't believe it. I'm just saying, when it comes to faith, I personally don't try to lump everyone together. The fact that, because what I mean is, I do think that you could be a Christian, say you're a Christian and be a secularist, just like you could be a secular Jew. So they're buying some of it, but not all of it. So I was just asking your opinion on that. I mean, you could obviously not agree with that, but I'm just saying, in my opinion, I don't lump people together.
Well, if I may, just a kind of a notion with the whole being a Catholic, there are a lot of people out there who are Catholic or recognize themselves as Catholic, but don't agree with everything the church does. I say this, we have examples of this where they actually get to a point to where they can't bear what the church does, and then they break off and create their own churches. For hundreds of years, they've been doing it, which causes murder, death, kill, slaughter.
There's actually a few different aspects to this kind of question. To say that somebody is ostensibly a member of some Christian denomination or branch, and yet has some questions or reservations. So one is that, they dislike the activities of the organized church.
Right.
That has nothing to do with whether or not they believe the doctrines of that church. That just has to do with the fallible leadership and perhaps inappropriate actions of the organized church.
Exactly.
Another type of reservation is they have questions or doubts about the doctrine itself. They're not necessarily rejecting everything, But in days gone by, that would have been considered heresy, rejection of dogma.
Mm-hmm.
And yet a third possibility is they accept everything about the church, except they also are secularists, which is to say they don't want the church to be interfering with people's ability and opportunity to solve real problems in the world in a way that is based upon facts and logical analysis. So they're secularists. So there's lots of different ways that someone can question. One can be regarded as questioning the activities or the beliefs of the church.
You know, we also have to be careful of avoiding. I know, I kind of hear what Damien is saying about calling everybody who's a Catholic this or something, but we can't stop every time in the conversation and say, you know, whenever Christians do, wait, I mean, not every Christian, just some Christians. Okay. And then those certain Christians go along and they hate the Jews. Wait, not every Jew, just some. We can't do that throughout these conversations. So you have to understand that whenever he means Catholic, or whatever we're talking about a specific, you know, I mean, there's obvious courses of conversation.
Yeah, and there's a few ways to look at that. In chapter 14 of the magnum opus, I talk about the reasons people have for faith. And part of that in there is some inertia and social signaling. And let me just kind of answer the question that Damien had. So as a scientist, definitions are important. So if someone calls himself a secular Jew or a non-practicing Catholic, that's a non sequitur. That's an oxymoron. It doesn't make any sense. You're either a Jew or you're not. Now, you may be a Reformed Jew or whatever Jew, and I get it that with people having microscopic attention spans and even less understanding of the terms, that it's easy just to say something and go along with it because people know what they're talking about. Social signaling is very important. So when someone says, I am a Catholic, there is a massive amount of implication that that person is projecting, whether they know it or not. Mm-hmm. And there's a huge balkanization. Christopher Hitchens made this point extremely well when he was talking about his book, God Is Not Great. He said that every time he went and had a debate or had a discussion or did a book tour, he would have had to write a different book for every believer due to the unbelievably massive differences in belief between each believer. Right. So as far as I'm concerned, if I'm going in a laboratory, I'm not going to call it, it's kind of a hydrogen oxygen. No, it's either hydrogen or oxygen. You're in or you're out. It's a binary choice.
Well, but there's also a fallacy of the black and white. Of making everything, or you could be straw manning the fact that you're just making it simpler so it's easier to attack. I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying that you said that someone having different variations of faith is a non sequitur, and I'm just saying that in a logical debate, though, we have to understand that we can't just make things black and white. We can't straw man ideas. Although you need to understand, I never was a Catholic, so it's not like I'm trying to defend them. And I'm an anti-theist and an anti-religionist, so I think all religion is toxic poison. But I'm just saying that I try to approach people at what they tell me. So I don't want to.
Also, there's a difference between criticizing the religion and criticizing the person who adheres to the religion, because some people adhere to a loathsome religion and yet are quite decent human beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the fortunate/unfortunate element of humanity, is that when someone social signals and says, I'm a Catholic, then folks like us, we go, okay, wait a minute. Have you ever given money to the Catholic Church? Do you know you're paying the salary of rapist priests?
Right.
Do you know that you're paying the legal fees and payoff funds for the children who've been violently raped by these criminals? In fact, do you know that your church is a pedophile ring, and every penny you give to that pedophile ring goes to all these evil ends? So folks don't think about that. They go and think, well, I'm in my little Catholic group and we do our rosary beads and we do this and we do that and we're good people. And they may very well be. But nevertheless, the institution writ large is a horribly evil institution.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Hey, Damien, I think this is a fascinating idea, what he's done here with his book. And because you're a person who's working on a book that is also extremely voluminous.
It's extremely.
I think it would be a good idea to, or at least entertain the idea of releasing, like he calls it, his magnus opus, the full complete version, and then chapter book would make it digestible chunks.
Yeah, I can sympathize with that. When I was writing my book, I actually wrote twice as much material for the book as I ended up including in it. It's my background as a writer for medical journals, where I was always fighting word count limits, that I just cut ruthlessly everything that was not completely germane to the topic at hand. And I ended up using only about half of what I had written in it. Max, I think that it would be very interesting if you would just spend a moment talking about the title of the magnum opus, Thank God for Eve, and the quite deliberate use and non-use of capitalization, what the title means.
Steve, thank you very much. And that's actually a fairly layered question. So thank God for Eve. The whole Christian ethos, the whole Christian myth is based on Eve and how she and Adam broke the initial agreement with God. They got kicked out of the garden, and now life is hell for everybody forever and anon until the second coming sometime 10 billion years from now. So that is a paradigm that they go by. And of course, the farther down south in the United States, the more fundamentalist you get, the worse Eve is portrayed, and the worse women are treated. So what I said is, no, Eve, in my mind, was a scientist. And actually, there's a chapter in the book that is sort of a fictional recount of what it really went like in the garden. And the issue is, Adam was kind of a dumbass. He was kind of a lunkhead, and he was your typical conservative. I follow orders. I just do what the boss tells me to, you know. And Eve is, no. Why is this? Why does this happen? What goes on here? She's curious. She wants to find out more. She doesn't want to be an ignorant stump living the rest of her life in a fishbowl. So she says, you know what? I'm going to do this. And she drags Adam kicking and screaming into the future, into science. So she was the first scientist, as you can see there. And by the way, my wife did all this artwork. I had the title, and she did all the actual artwork. So the idea is, she's looking at the science, and she's understanding things and wanting to know what's going on out there, not content to be a fish in a fishbowl, while Adam is. So she is the first scientist, the first free thinker, the first atheist, if you will, because that's how we are. We're unconstrained by rules and traditions. And so I wanted to say, no, rather than condemning Eve, it's thank for Eve. And the little g is a kind of a note, a nod to Christopher Hitchens' God is not great. He decapitalized God. But all religions, particularly the monotheisms, and again, Damien, I know you're going to maybe have a question about this. The Jains are a little bit different, and so on and so forth, a little bit different. But for sure, the half of the world's population that's monotheist doesn't look at women as an equal part of the species.
Well, so Jains included.
I'm sorry?
You said the Jains are included. I have a whole thing about sexism in religion, and Jains are not free of that, or the Sikhs, or anything. All the major religions actually have sexism in it.
So then it actually applies more broadly. So that's the issue, Steve, to answer your question, is rather than being penitent, and rather than cursing Eve, we should be thanking whoever made Eve and what he did with her.
I actually mentioned that in one of my recent videos, how it was actually Eve and the serpent are technically heroes. If it weren't for them, I mean, God had mindless slaves, and that's all they were, mindless slaves working in this garden to do his thing, and Satan and Eve broke them free, broke them out.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When I read Thank God for Eve, I remarked to Max that I had included a chapter in my own book, Doctrine Impossible, which also took a completely novel look at the Adam and Eve story, and said that this had nothing to do with the introduction of sin into the world. Sin is nonsense. It's a meaningless word. But what it was the beginning of humanity's quest to know, to learn, to grow. And it was very similar, I felt, to what I was reading in Max's book. We had independently come to similar views about that story.
And just to pile on top of that, Steve, it was interesting how the things that each of our individual books separately never met each other, but yet we ring very, very similarly. It's kind of funny. The process of convergent, not just evolution, but thinking rings true in all of us free thinkers. Everybody who's a free thinker could probably write a book, and all the rest of us would go, yeah, I thought about that. I thought about that. It's really rich. But to see the resonance there was quite striking.
I put out a book in 2013, and a couple years ago I rescanned it. I didn't like what I had, so I put a new cover on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was doing a little research for Richard Carey coming on my show, and one of his books has the exact same image.
Really?
Yeah, it's got
Nice.
different words on there and stuff like that. It's just an image I got off of Canva,
Uh-huh.
that you use for that very thing. I was like, wow, hey. On your book here, you've got some of these. I get all this. Most of this I kind of get.
Mm-hmm.
This one I don't get. This is like a out of place. This sounds like something out of a Scientology.
So it's sort of in the same kind of vein as the whole "Thank God for Eve" motif, because this is actually chapter 12. It's a chapter book, but it's the longest chapter in the book, and it's a fairly thick paperback by itself. This individual chapter. So what I wanted to do here was take a long, sharp stick and stick it straight in the eye of religion, because what I'm doing is sort of using a mental jujitsu. So the book is basically read this and turn your brain off. So thou shalt not think is kind of what the mandate is. And that's kind of where those, tombstone / commandment stones come from.
Right.
But the whole purpose of it is that's what it means. Thou shalt not think.
It's the commandment that comes before the first commandment.
Yes.
Yeah. I was interested in I thought you were attacking psychology.
Psychology, yeah, clearly.
How psychology subverts.
Reason.
You mean humans' psychology or motivations, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's
You don't mean
that's an interesting observation. Yeah, because no, that was not the intent at all. In fact, psychology is one of my strong points. It's something that I've had a lifelong fascination with, and the older I get, the more I feel that in many ways psychology is the only science that really matters. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting you guys have that. I may change that cover based on that observation. Thank you for pointing that out.
Well, I have a psychology degree, and I have some issues with psychology. That's actually why I became an atheist activist. More is because I saw that they really push religion, especially in addiction and all that, and I was like. That they don't even give an option. Even like this one class I had, and I have a video of it. The guy is like talking about how everybody's spiritual, and I said, I raised my hand. I'm not spiritual. I'm an atheist. I don't even acknowledge that word as having any meaning. Yeah. And he's like, well, you could still be spiritual. And I'm like, did you even hear what I just said?
Words matter.
Hold on a second. He literally didn't have another word. He didn't know what to say. I mean, it was dumbfounding. He's a professor, and he didn't even know what to say.
Yeah, I would have an argument, but that's a separate program about spirituality and the difference that I see, profound difference between religiosity and spirituality.
Yeah,
but separate topic.
Separate, yeah. Max, thank you for explaining that. Because really, I thought I was really starting to like this guy, and then I read, all your books. I'm reading your stuff. I'm like, this is pretty cool. I'm like, what the hell? How's psychology? All right, so are psychologists bad and they subvert reason?
No, that's a great observation. Thank you very much. I had not even thought about that at all.
If you just said
human psychology,
if you just replaced how religion subverts reason and opens Pandora's box of faith, that would be more appropriate. And I mean, although you got the two tombstones, I just didn't get the psychology. How psychology? Now I understand that there's.
Well, those aren't tombstones, are they? Those are the tablets.
10 commandments.
Yeah, 10 commandments. Exactly right.
Tombstone,
more likely.
Same thing.
Yeah, tombstone. I see. I misspoke. Yeah. So thank you for clearing that up, because I mean we were just starting to think he was an all right kind of guy. So
great question. Thank you.
This is kind of this is just obvious.
So that one there is because I am so sick and tired of the religious right in America saying that United States we're a Christian nation, we're a religious nation. That is not the case. So what I do is I go through there and I go through the actual from the time basically the first Europeans hit dirt in the United States all the way through today, really the 2016 elections. Because that's kind of the time frame the book was written, and I go through and I extrapolate everything from major Supreme Court cases to the witch burnings to the second and third and fourth Great Awakenings to all these other different things. When we put in God we trust on money and buildings and everything, and I go through and I show how in every case from slavery to all these other things that we're talking about, religion is the problem, and it is not a Christian nation. It's never been a Christian nation. So this is more of a recitation of all the bad ways that religion has messed up America since even before our founding.
Gotcha.
Well, my point would be even if it was a Christian nation, you could still do that. Look at how you promoted slavery. Look at how you didn't give women rights. Look at how you've attacked, the foreigners. I mean, America's got a atrocious, thing. So even if it was, boy, it sure didn't help human rights at all.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's one of the major themes in my book, and that's something that Steve and I had a short digression about separately over email. Yes, there's never been a place, there's never been a time where, particularly the monotheisms, wherever they've been in charge, it has resulted in negative and very bad outcomes for people, to include the Holocaust, to include the Inquisitions and the Crusades, and the list just goes on and on.
Yep.
Max, one of the things that I thought when I was reading Thank God for Eve was that there's lots of books about the problems with religion and promoting a secular viewpoint and such, and each of them offers something unique. They aren't just duplicates of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Your Thank God for Eve, what struck me as unique, and I'd like you to comment on this more, is first of all, its scope. It is the most comprehensive takedown of religion that I've encountered. And secondly, I very much appreciated the way that throughout the book you pose lists of challenging questions that just grip the reader and force the reader to say yes or no. Does this make sense? Do I agree with this? Can I go on adhering to the religion after reading these things? And those questions, I think, are a vital attraction or asset, I should say, to Thank God for Eve. So I wonder if you could just comment a little on what you think was the unique element that you brought to the discussion in writing that book.
Steve, thank you. That's a wonderful question, and I'll answer it in a couple of different ways. One is, you're right. I did design it to be a fully comprehensive book so that a newbie all the way through a seminary professor or someone like us who's been doing this for a year or two, we would be able to get something out of it, and you could use that and hand it to someone else. I've always been a teacher or a trainer. So the idea is I wanted to write the anti-theist's Bible, the atheist Bible, quote unquote, and be able to hand that to a person or be able to explain things to a person in a way that was both comprehensive and visceral, because we all know that people don't vote and don't act and don't think and make decisions based on facts. We do it based on emotion. So that's what I wanted to do, Steve, was I wanted to get in there with some visceral knives. And when you personalize something, it's almost like putting them in that situation for real. And when you do that, you begin to empathize and you begin to realize, wow, this is something that I really can't defend anymore. So when that starts to fall and the other plank starts to fall, then the whole house of cards starts to fall. And I deliberately designed it to do that, to resonate with the emotions, not just the intellect. There are places in the book, and back to our point earlier, where if you're an honest Catholic, you will stop becoming a Catholic, because of all the evil and the pain and the questions that I asked, just specifically to bring those things out. I wanted to almost be a tearjerker in a couple places to do that kind of visceral emotion. So, and I kill all the, not all of them. You can never have a book that kills all the arguments, but most of those idiotic and just plain wrong arguments that the faithful use: dreams, personal feelings, fine-tuning, Pascal's wager, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to do was take a book that was even more hard-hitting than Christopher Hitchens. It was blended with the facts of a Shermer and a Dawkins and a Dennett, and it also blended a little bit of satire and humor, because the Jonathan Swift type humor and satire is incredibly effective. Trump is a great example of, in unbelievably thin skin, the easiest way to expose something is to laugh at it and to make fun of it. And those people in those positions really hate that. The only thing they hate more than that is having their funding cut off, which is why I'm such a visceral opponent of Catholicism. And so what makes it different is the scope and the way it personalizes and the way you can use it as a teaching and training tool for any setting, be it religious or secular.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to.
It's also worth noting in my experience in a totally different area of activity, that what sometimes is effective is when different people take different approaches, so that it's kind of like a multi-pronged attack on whatever it is that we're trying to change. Notwithstanding the fact that you and I, Max, both addressed similar kinds of themes, you remarked about my book that mine was more intellectual oriented, a little cooler in its presentation, because your book, for those who haven't yet read it, your book is white hot in its intensity. Mine, perhaps because, again, because my background as a science writer, that's how I spent my career, is more detached, perhaps intellectual. But the two of them together, kind of like a 1-2 punch, I'm hopeful that that's effective.
I absolutely agree, Steve. And like you said, we had that discussion. So, as we talked earlier about there being shades and variations of belief even within the same person or congregations, what you wrote and the sort of the tone and the tenor that will appeal to the more cerebral, if you will, the more open to logic. Mine was, if you will, to take it to the Paula Whites of the world, the megachurch pastors of the world, and their fanatic, the Trump devotees of the world, the ones who really need to have some pain introduced upon them before they will see the light, if you will. So I think you're exactly right. I think either of our works by themselves wouldn't do everything that you could possibly do in terms of reaching the audience. So it was just kind of one of those, reach across the spectrum of inoculation, if you will.
Yeah.
I have another one here. You want to pull up another? Can I pull up another one?
Please.
Yeah, let's talk about this one here. An opening salvo on coexistence, plus everybody's an atheist and I can prove it. Catchy title.
Absolutely. Thank you. No, that's another chapter book out of the book.
Yes.
And the idea is, and this is also something that Dawkins talks about a lot. So we're not just talking about the 30 plus, maybe 33,000 today variations of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the fact that even if you're the Pope, there are, depending on how you do your accounting, Buddhism and other religions, there are thousands to tens of thousands to millions of gods. And if you just do the math, if you only believe in 0.000001 of the gods out there, you're a de facto atheist. And simple mathematical proof says I can just round down and call you an atheist. If you're an atheist about 9,999 gods, there's actually a little picture I have in the book of, a grid with 10,000 squares on it. Just one of them is lit up. And you think you're some, you've got the keys of discernment and you have the only keys to the true real kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
In different places in the book, I destroy things like the fact that Christianity is just a borrowing of all the different religions from the ancient Middle East and, pre-Christian times and pre-Hebrew times. It's just the latest distillation that was sort of codified and it was fossilized when, the council met and sort of codified that set of books.
Well, I agree with the fact that the Hebrew religion is a conglomeration of stuff from before. I don't really agree with your point about being an atheist. An atheist is someone who does not believe in gods or lacks belief in gods. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter if there's a bazillion gods. If you believe in one, you're a theist. Period. Yeah. I mean, I understand what your point is. They're being atheistic towards all these other ones.
Yeah.
But that's not what it takes to be an atheist. Atheist is not a choice. It's simply that you accept that there is a God of any amount, and you're already a theist.
That's like arguing it from the other side. We often hear people try to claim that we atheists are not really atheists and we believe in one fashion or another. And then they try to use some kind of mental gymnastics to get around to that. And we're like, no, dude, you're not listening to the words that are coming out of my mouth. They're for your benefit. If you don't believe in gods, any gods, you're an atheist. If you believe in only one, then you become a theist.
Yeah, that part, Chris, is where we are accused of secretly being believers, but it for some unfathomable reason.
Right.
Yeah, and again, the point isn't to. The point wasn't to convince you guys. The point is to give this to a believer, and
Right.
God by God by God by God, down the list of 9,999. So you're an atheist about this God, about this God, about this God, about this God, because it's all about winning the psychological war of ideas and facts.
Yeah. I get you.
So, and this is one of those points where I don't want to get pedantic, but you guys are on the side of science and reason and the place where we need to be, the secular humanism. This is the
we
thing
hope
where you,
all atheists are.
I mean, it is what it is. You look at the statistics, look at the numbers, it's just where we are. So
Yeah.
this really isn't about converting you. This is about showing the unbelievable hypocrisy of the theist community.
Yeah. It also gets their attention too. And they're like, wait a
Yes.
second, I'm not an atheist. And then they start reading the book.
Absolutely.
On this topic of frequent theistic claims about atheism, one of the points I had noted, particularly on Twitter, is that theists have far more hostility toward atheists than they do towards members of other religions, and I attributed it to they regard people who are members of other religions as, well, they simply chose the wrong sacred book, whereas atheists are a far greater threat because we reject the entire notion of sacred books. And I think that it would be good, Max, if you could go over some other common arguments that we hear from theists. I was particularly impressed, for example, with how you handled, and thank God for Eve, how you handled the usual accusation, oh, atheists have killed more people than theists have. Look at Hitler, look at Stalin. As if the definition of the value of religion is, well, we're not as big as scumbags as you are. And
that's just bad understanding on their part. Hitler wasn't an atheist, and Stalin was more like he semi-deified his own self.
Of course, I mean it's an absurd argument.
So in order for him to do that, he would have to go undo all the bad knowledge all these people have.
But I liked how Max handled that particular topic. So perhaps you could go into that a little bit, Max.
Steve, thank you. I appreciate it. So that's one that I have heard so often is, kind of what you talked about. Well, atheists have killed so many people. So I've heard the fine tuning. I've heard the second law of thermodynamics, all these, I would call them, in the military, we call this pole vaulting over mouse turds. It's almost, when you ask the question, okay, so what is the second law of thermodynamics? The person you're speaking with gives you that RCA dog, like, well, I don't know. I just know that so they have no idea what they're talking about. They're just mostly parroting things.
That's right.
And this is no different. The whole Pascal's wager, the fine tuning, all these arguments, it's just a parroting of the nonsense that they hear in the pulpits. But this one that a lot of people really, it resonates with them viscerally, is this whole idea that somehow Hitler was an atheist and Stalin was an atheist, and et cetera, et cetera. And I devote an entire chapter to it. And I start off with, okay, just like Luther swung a hammer onto the Wittenberg church, I've got to make a stand and say this is not true. So I take that whole chapter and I go through, as some others have, how, in fact, as Chris just said, Hitler was, in many times, he said he was a Christian, he said he was a Catholic, but how, more importantly, 95% of the German population were Christians. And even if Hitler were, which he was not, clearly and specifically, none of his inner circle really were non-Christians. Most of them were Christians, Catholic, Protestants, some variation of that religion. But even if all of them were, still, who were the ones that put the rifle butts into the back of the heads of the Jews? Who were the ones that turned the screws in the gas chambers? Who were the ones that participated in the final solution? It wasn't ranks of Nazis. It was Christians, it was Catholics, it was Protestants, and all throughout Europe. I kind of go through all the different places, the different ways that Mussolini and the Vatican signed a concord. The Hitler signed a concord with the Vatican, with the church. How Eugenio Pacelli, the Pope that was Pope, as Hitchens actually very well said, the sort of kind of maybe good Pope died right before the war, and then you get Hitler's Pope, who's the Pope all through and beyond World War II. So I wanted to clearly devastate that argument and show in no way, shape, or form, by word, by deed, not just was Hitler, but the entire 95% of the German population were Christians, and they're the ones that perpetrated this. And the same sort of thing goes out through the rest of the other, the psychopaths throughout history. And at the end of the chapter, I make the point, and Chris, I think you just alluded to it. It is theoretically possible, yes, for a person to be an atheist and a psychopath, a Christian, Catholic, Muslim, and a psychopath. The problem is, as we've talked earlier, psychology is the root of all human behavior. So the psychopathy is the problem, and the right-wing authoritarianism or left-wing authoritarianism is the problem. It's just that religion, because it pretends to dip into a pool of infinite power and infinite justification, which is the Bible and the Quran. It says you can do literally anything. You can kill anybody for almost any reason and find a justification for it in the Bible. So the psychology that derives out of a state of psychopathy is the reason for all this stuff. But it's a case of two psychopaths standing side by side. One has his fists, and he's the atheist. The other one has a nuclear weapon, and he is the Muslim or the Christian, because they have the holy book to choose from. But I devastate the argument that anybody would ever say that Hitler was any kind of an atheist.
Right, and as far as Stalin, actually, Stalin at first in the Communist Party was not against the church. It was only because in the White War that the Catholics actually started to try to take down the communists that then they became, in a sense, anti-church.
Yeah, the only thing that the Vatican really cares about is preserving power and keeping Peter's pence coming in. That's the only thing they've ever cared about. That's why they had the concordats with Hitler and with Mussolini and with all the other fiefdoms throughout Eastern Western Europe, and why eventually, yes, they became such a bulwark that they thought. This is why Pacelli was such an evil person. He would do everything he did because he felt in the service of continuing the church. And the fight against Bolshevism, which he saw as the most existential threat to Catholicism in the Vatican. That's why he did things like side against the Russians and Stalin, and why he had the rat line going during the end of and after World War II.
Yeah. The business that you had raised, the point you had raised, Max, about the fact that it was not the leaders. Hitler himself did not turn the valves that unleashed the gas in the gas chambers. That these atrocities were carried out by rank and file people who ostensibly were believers, were Christians. It raises an important point. I think that harkens to the fact that you, in your book, you address the reader in a very visceral way. It comes down to whether or not a person gives assent by silence to crimes that are taking place in the name of religion. So whether we're talking about rank and file believers who are actually carrying out the atrocities ordered by the Hitlers and the Stalins, or just more ordinary believers in America today who are not committing war crimes, but are giving assent by silence to the nonsense and the harmful nonsense that churches are peddling.
Steve, that's a great point, and I appreciate you making it on behalf of all of us secular humanists, progressives, and people who actually care about humanity. So you're exactly right. If Christianity writ large, and we could take Islam separately, but for right now, just talking about Christianity, if Christianity were in fact a bulwark against any kind of evil, we would not have had the Crusades. We would not have had the Inquisitions. We would not have had the Holocaust, which was fostered for hundreds of years, and particularly mostly in the late 1700s and 1800s by La Civiltà Cattolica, which is the Catholic Church's official publication. It fostered, it brought to a white-hot edge the anti-Semitism that the church had for over 1,000 years. So if it had ever been possible for religion to stop something from happening, it would have, but it didn't. Every time it had the opportunity to stop it, it didn't. And you're exactly right. Here in America today, and people think that just because we happen to live in the current age that we're somehow different from people 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. We are genetically exactly the same. The only difference is we have the hindsight of history, but people are still the same. That's why psychology is so important. Right-wing authoritarians today, no different from the crazy people that wrote the book.
I just want to make one point. I'm a leftist, But I do think that there's a big problem also with left-wing authoritarianism. What I would say is that in general, authoritarianism is a a motivation to do all kinds of horrid evils.
So no question, and that's where authoritarian by itself is a problem. And you are correct.
Yeah.
There have been instances in certain places, particularly in Europe and South and Central America, where left-wing authoritarianism has had a problem. But the psychology is where we're trying to get to. The psychology of a left-wing authoritarian is different from that of a right-wing authoritarian. So the while they may have been left in maybe policy, the fact that a lot of people on the right, we're talking politically speaking here now, and the people who tend to be religious, they tend to be those who are, because we're 98.5% a chimpanzee, they like to follow the great leader, the deer leader, the silverback, the one who yells and screams and throws feces against the cage louder and harder than anybody else. So in most cases, that quote unquote right-wing authoritarianism is a state of mind where people are more willing to fall in line behind somebody doing evil. And that is the core issue of the psychology, where people, even if they profess faith in, Jesus the Redeemer, meek and mild, turn the other cheek, yet they will not, as Stephen, you so expertly said it just a moment ago, they will not stand up and be counted when things like, kids getting thrown in cages and Jews getting thrown in gas chambers are happening.
Hey, Max, there's kind of a thing going on in the chat. They're trying to figure out some of the things you're talking about. Now, Earlier you said Eve was the first scientist. Or did you say atheist?
Well, so let me make sure I'm tracking. So Eve, again, we're just talking about
the literary character Eve, not the actual person. We know there was no real Eve. Yeah. Carry on.
So in terms of how those two people interacted, Eve was the first scientist. Adam was your typical, just to use political terms, Republican. Do whatever the boss says. Eve was, nope, I'm a scientist. I'm going to figure this out. And that's why she was the first free thinker and scientist.
Gotcha. All right. So that's one point. Just because I think somebody misunderstood. You said atheist, and how can Eve be an atheist if blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what he said. It's a misunderstanding. There was another thing about the title of your book. It was about the psychology. For those who missed it, we covered it. It's just kind of a misunderstanding about. I'm pulling this up. You can't see it, but it's a misunderstanding about what that is. And then he even said he might even change that to make that a clearer, because it sounds like he's blaming psychology for stuff when that's not what's happening. And then finally, on this one right here, it's a rhetorical point. He's trying to say you're an atheist about everything else except this, and this is why. It's a rhetorical point. He's not really telling everybody they're literally an atheist.
Right.
So we'll move on. People in the chat, just stop fighting about it. Move on.
Yeah. No, if I go up to somebody who's a very devout Catholic or Christian, and I say, are you a believer in Amun-Ra? And they'll say no. And I say, you're an atheist towards Amun-Ra. And that is an undisputable statement. Yes, they are a theist, but they're an atheist in 9,099 other ways.
Right. And again, not as a person who writes his own book, I even have a hard time titling my own books. Perhaps a clearer title. But anyway, moving on. That's your business. I wanted to ask you about this one here, and I don't mean to be rude to the folks in the chat. I just see them going off about things that are not. There's a misunderstanding about you that we already cleared up, and they weren't getting. I didn't want anybody fighting. No fighting. Kissing, make up. Anyway, now we've got this other book, 40. Now I've heard the phrase 6 degrees of separation. Can you clarify what this means?
Yes, sir. So that is completely unrelated to Thank God for Eve, and it is a fictional story. You could almost call it science fiction. My thesis has always been that the most intelligent person in the world could be a 15-year-old girl in Afghanistan. How would we ever know? It could be a 7-year-old boy in the outback. How would we ever know? This story is a very short story about a girl who is that 15-year-old girl in Afghanistan, probably the smartest person in the world at the time, but nobody ever knows. And of course, at the end of the story, she is killed by the Taliban at that point, but I don't use the names. But the 4 degrees of separation is I use it and I kind of start that thread, but I move it through 4 different universes, if you will. So if she had been born in the United States, how would she have turned out? If she had done this career choice in a different place, how would she have turned out? So that's where the kind of, 4 reflections of the world there are. So if one life had been lived in 4 different ways, in one you get killed by a band of ignorant male thugs, in the other one you become, you cure world poverty, cancer, and everything else.
So in a way, it sounds almost like a parable of the themes that appear in Thank God for Eve, talking about the ways that religiosity can destroy people and interfere with human progress.
Yes, sir. That is exactly what I intended to do. Exactly. And because you reach a lot of people through fiction, because you generate the empathy within that person through their human psychology, that's why I said that fiction is a great way to reach people. So that was political / religious focused with a parable, like you say. And if you've ever read Harry Harrison, he had a great, and I wish I could remember the title of the story, but this was influenced by a little bit of the things that he used to do and some of the messaging he would do in his writing as well. So, but that's for the purpose of this book.
It almost reminds me of explaining the veil of ignorance in morality. That there's a moral thing in philosophy of morality that basically, if you were in a veil of ignorance, if you didn't know who you were, you're like outside. You're gonna be born into a world, and you didn't know who you're gonna be. You don't know if you're male. You don't know if you're gay. You don't know if you're straight. You don't know if you're religious or an atheist. So if you have that veil of ignorance, if you were going to be born into this world, you would want to have as many rights as possible. That way you're covered. So the thought is that you give rights to everyone in a sense to exist. That way that and it's trying to show people, that take them out of themselves and say, look, if something was different, wouldn't you want rights? If you were born a woman, wouldn't you want rights? If you were born and you were gay, wouldn't you want to have gay rights? So it tries to put you in a mindset that if you are not who you are now, but you don't know who you are, wouldn't you want then rights for everyone? So it kind of sounds like a similar thing to that.
Absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah, Damien, that's an interesting point, because so many people seem to think that if some group that I'm not part of, but some other group has rights, somehow that diminishes.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's not pie.
Right. So, Max, what is your hopes for promoting the themes and the kind of thinking that are evident in Thank God for Eve? What are your plans in terms of maximizing the effectiveness of your work?
So again, Steve, a fantastic question, and thank you. So I think it's the same for all of us who've written, Chris with his work here on video. I think all of us share the same compulsion, if you will, almost, to make sure that we do everything we can within our scope to introduce that veil of ignorance, that secular humanism, that humanism, frankly, writ large, in as many ways as we possibly can. So the strategic idea, again, going back to the military and strategic planning, the strategic idea was to set things out there that would be useful. So these are the tools in my kit bag, the ammo, if you will. So the axe, the big tree chopper is Thank God for Eve. And the knives in the kit bag are the chapter books. So the idea is to go to different various places, people. I go to, every once in a while, I will go to a church and see who I might be able to pick off in the pews. I will talk to religious believers. I had in one case about a 2-year running ongoing dialogue with a local Catholic lay leader. So I'm trying to approach people at both their weakness and their strength. The written word is a great, easy way to do that. So I do things like try to pump it up and get people to read it. But it's engaging on Twitter. It's engaging on social media. It's doing these fantastic interviews like we're doing here with you gentlemen. But it's getting more people to kind of see the light. And, truth be told, frankly, my father passed away pretty young, comparatively speaking. I'm almost at that age. So if I were to die tomorrow, then I kind of want that legacy to live on. And for me personally, the written word is the easiest way to do that. So plant that seed, get that out there. I've done giveaways of the book. I've sent it to folks like, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Richard Dawkins. And, the only person fun fact, the only person that's written back is Neil deGrasse Tyson's admin, who said, yep, thank you for the book. I appreciate it. But I'm trying to get it out to those guys because, you influence the influencers. And if those guys start using some of these talking points, then you've multiplied your combat effectiveness by 10, 50 or 100-fold. So I'm trying to do those kind of things. I'm going to things like the Freedom from Religion Conference and other conferences and things of that nature. Aaron Ra, I think you guys know Aaron Ra.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I've engaged with him a little bit. So trying to engage with those gentlemen who have platforms. You guys have some platforms here, obviously, doing great things for the cause. So it's really what I intend to do. I'm also assisting local political leaders in trying to get blue candidates elected in red states, because politics and religion are irrevocably intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to get religion out of not just the country, but out of politics and out of our morality is to put blue candidates in office. So, and in that case, once you reach a critical mass, the blue politicians are able to make decisions, and the red politicians, due to the colorization upcoming of our country, due to the demographic shift, at some point, hopefully, we'll have a critical mass. And I want to make sure that critical mass of blue is, even if not atheistic, at least is agnostic toward religion and is not going to make it in our politics, because I don't want any of our daughters to live in a Christian state.
One of our viewers asked, have you worked with the Military Freedom from Religion Foundation?
Not the Military Freedom from Religion Foundation. I haven't reached out to them. That's probably something I ought to do.
I also wanted to ask you, do you have another book on the horizon? How's that working out?
I've got 2 or 3, kind of like Steve said a little while ago. I think any of us who have written have 2 or 3 times the amount of material. So yeah, I've got one that's as big as Thank God for Eve on politics. I see Damien laughing over there. Yeah.
My first book, I haven't finished publishing it. Actually, it's my second book. My first book was poetry. But my the book that I'm working on now, at first it was like 6,000 pages, and I took it to a reading. And this person goes, "This is like 5 books," and I was like,
Yeah.
"No, it's gonna be one kill everything." And they're like, "No one's
Right.
gonna be able to hold it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we all face that. But so right now, because I'm heavily engaged in assisting this, hopefully, blue candidate in a red state, deeply red state, to be elected, I'm kind of on hiatus. I don't anticipate trying to publish anything until the next year, till 2021.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging when I read statistics about the surveys of the population that show increasing percentages of people who are willing to say no religion, non-believer. I'm at my age. I will not live to see the goal that we all seek, but I am encouraged by that kind of trend.
I completely agree. And, even the folks that I'm working with, this may sound funny, but the person who I'm supporting is a Christian, a fairly strong Christian, but she is absolutely against any kind of mixing of church and state. She's very, very progressive, except for the fact that she happens to believe in an imaginary sky fairy. We feel 99% of the way similarly on a lot of issues. So, yeah, I mean, Steve, I think we all feel the same way you do. We're all striving. I don't know if I'll see it either. I'm just 53 almost, so I think we're still kind of a ways out from getting there. But again, the demographic shift is happening, and I do see at some point the bubble is going to burst, because the reason that the Christian right is so rabid and is so crazy is that they see and sense their power slipping away, and the more desperate people become, the more crazy they become. So hopefully we are going to reach an asymptotic breaking point here, and we'll cross a critical threshold, and we won't have to worry about this anymore until the next.
But Max, I think you have a good point though, because we also push humanism, and that's what I try to say. I don't expect, and it may be possible to rid us of religion completely, the whole world. I mean, it would be nice, but I do believe it is possible to make everybody, or a majority of the world's population see the value of humanism. So
absolutely,
that's a more attainable goal, and since it would bring more peace and freedom for everyone, I don't see how it can really be challenged other than just people being fanatically religious.
Exactly, I think all of us see it exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, guys, our hour is up. I appreciate you swinging by and visiting with me, and Damien and Steve. Thank you for co-hosting and bearing with me, and thanks, Max.
Thank you, sir. Hey, Chris, I really appreciate this opportunity. It's been fantastic and fun. You're right. It's been an hour, but it feels like about 5 minutes have passed. You guys are great.
Yeah, and we'll have links in the description below to Steven, to Damien, and to Max's work, to all of them. They're all down there. Look, guys, check in the description. If there's not something there that you wanted, let me know. Of course, give me a break. I only got 5,000 characters. I'd have had this one person send me a book. Damien?
No, I sent you 8 articles, and then when you had a question, I sent another 8.
No, I meant for the description. The first time I was like, I need a bio for the thing, and he sent me this thing. It was this long. Anyway, guys, thank you. You are all wonderful. Damien, thank you for showing up. Sorry, brother. I'm a bad Chris. We'll get you.
Chris, thank you very much for allowing me to share the hosting duties with you. As I did yesterday, this was an enormously enjoyable, fun experience for me.
Thank you. I'm glad. And again, yesterday, there's a part of me, the nice guy in me, wants to apologize, but I enjoyed your guest yesterday. I just think that I would enjoy challenging his ideas more freely, because on my show yesterday, I didn't want to be a jerk and go, man, that's wrong. That's just wrong. We know this is not.
I can't speak for Bernard, but I'm guessing that he would welcome.
He would probably welcome
to appear again with you and invite your toughest questions.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm willing to come. No.
Yeah, Damien's got some. Anyway, he was fun. You guys are fun. Thank you all. Tomorrow we're gonna have Dr. Richard Carrier on the show. Atheist Pastor is gonna come co-host with me. That's gonna be fun. And then next week I don't have a lot of people lined up. I've got a couple of guests, but I'm gonna try to switch from StreamYard. So next week could be very rough technically for me. You might notice some live stream. Oh, Chris is going live, and then you go over there to notice, and I'm not really live. I'm just testing something because I'm switching, and I'm going to go to StreamYards and OBS, and I've got to rebuild my whole show. So be patient with me over this next week. I may have people, like I've got Damien will be there Monday, even if I don't have a guest. I do have a guest. It's the president of the Canadian Atheist. Tuesday, I'll have Talk Heathens, Eric Murphy on the show, and Andy with the writer Andy Hall from Pathos. But I may not have other people throughout. It may just be me and whoever I can get on, because I haven't been focusing on getting people for this coming week because of the technical difficulties I may have. So there's that. All right, guys. Thank you all, and everybody have a wonderful day. Have a great weekend. I'll see you all tomorrow for Sci-Fi.
You too. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.